Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Chesty Caleb. Starting off great this week. We're going to start with my weird news stories about animals for the first segment, including a new study that shows that the second thing behind having a gun that is most likely to protect you from a polar bear is your body, just to get naked. We'll get into that one in the next segment. We will do my weirdest stories of the week, including a 3-year-old who was dragged into the air by a kite, and a beachgoer who found 78 pounds of cocaine. In the third segment, we will do my real-world stories, including a lady who was kicked out of a bingo hall for not using a mask to cover up her breathing hole, which is in her neck. Goodness gracious, that's so not funny, but I can promise you, I will be laughing. And then we're going to finish off with my top 10 funniest, most odd phobias. So stay tuned for that. For now, we are going to dive into my animal stories. Alright, starting off with polar bears. So in recent years, polar bear tourism has gained popularity for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. Apparently there are places in Canada where locals and tourists can stand in big see-through tanks and actually get face-to-face with one of these polar bears without actually getting hurt. Despite this, it was about a week ago when a 38-year-old tourist died from a polar bear attack. Many people don't know this, but polar bears are unique in that they are the only animal on Earth that will actively hunt humans. I know they look cute and fluffy, but since it's very hard for them to find food to eat, if they see something moving, they will try to eat it, even if it's a smelly human. Alright, so a new study came out on polar bears, and its job was to list the top 3 ways to deter a polar bear attack. Number 1 on their list is mace. One expert of polar bears said on the issue, quote, 3 years ago, during a vintage air rally across the Arctic, I visited the abandoned Air Force Base Blue East 2 on Greenland's rugged east coast. While walking around, I had to carry bear spray, which is mace for bears. According to several Air Greenland pilots I talked to beforehand, the spray does work. However, when you spray, you have to be close and upwind. Otherwise, it doesn't go so well. So, mace is their number 1 way to deter a polar bear attack. The only problem is you have to be within the polar bear's attack range in order to actually spray them with it. And if the wind is blowing the wrong way, you will end up macing yourself with bear spray, which I would imagine does not feel good. Alright, and their second best way to deter polar bear attacks is with a gun. The bear expert goes on to say, quote, always carry a gun or travel with someone who has a firearm. While no one wants to kill a polar bear, you might have to if you want to save your own life. Sick and desperate bears are the ones that often come close to humans. During the air rally, I spent a night in Kulusuk. The day after we left, a half-starved polar bear wandered into town and had to be shot at close range to save several school children nearby. If you guys remember the grizzly man from about a decade ago, he was a bear expert and he got killed by a grizzly bear. Many people think that the reason he got attacked was that the bear was starving. So don't mess around if you see a smaller bear. That might just mean it's extra hungry. Alright, and the third best way to deter a polar bear attack, get naked. Alright, 4 minutes in and we finally have the first weird news story. Quote, there is no way you can outrun a polar bear. but they are, according to word of mouth, easily distractible. Polar bears are very curious. I don't know if I want to get curious with a polar bear, but, to each his own. Quote, Sarah Woodwall, a tourism destination manager for Visit South Greenland, told me during my first trip to the country in 2015 that polar bears are very curious. To that end, if you should come face to face with one, back away slowly at first, while peeling off your clothes one item at a time. The bears are very curious, so they should stop, sniff, and perhaps play with each item as they come across it, leaving you free time to run somewhere across the Arctic buck naked. Until they catch up with you, of course, or you die of exposure. Either way, what an experience. And that's the end of his quote. Quite a professional study, if you ask me. I'm not sure I entirely buy this study. If the whole premise is that bears are curious and that'll save your life from it trying to eat you, maybe you should just drop like a fidget spinner or something. That'd probably be better than your clothes. But hey, I don't know. I've never been in that position. So if any of you have taken your clothes off in front of a polar bear, let me know how it went. I can't imagine it seeing your bare meat makes it less hungry. But what do I know? Okay, next animal story. An Ohio man built a backyard squirrel bar. I can't say that name. Here, let me try. Squirrel bar with 7 varieties of nuts on tap. That was pretty good. This one's pretty genius. If you can go online and follow along with the pictures, it's very entertaining. Basically, he created a communal bar for squirrels with different flavored nuts. The man's name is Michael Dutko, and he is a 35-year-old hobbyist, which means he's unemployed. Nevertheless, he's an incredibly talented gentleman who has been creating art and household items from wood for most of his life. You can go on YouTube and find his channel, Duke Harmon Woodworking, where you will find these cute, interesting, impressive contraptions. The most recent of which he has titled the Nutty Bar, which is attached to his backyard fence, is shaped just like a real bar, and even has a range of nuts on it. The man said when questioned, quote, "The whole reason I even started to make this is because my neighbor bird watches with her daughter and told me all of the squirrels keep getting in her way." You're looking in the wrong direction, lady. He goes on to say, quote, "I didn't even tell her what I was going to do. I just built it and put it back there, and when she saw it, she just started cracking up." The nut bar has many different flavors, as previously mentioned, each of which are related to different kinds of beer. You have cashew dunkel, peanut pilsner, almond ale, walnut stout, sunflower saison, pecan porter, and pistachio pale ale. There were probably at least 3 or 4 mispronunciations in there, but I don't drink a whole lot of beer, so don't blame me. When asked what his favorite part of the bar was, the man who made it said, "It's the bathroom signs, one of which says nuts and one of which says no nuts." One of those jokes that just writes itself and is eternally funny. The man went on to say that it took him about 8 hours to build a standard work day. And more heroically, he said that after posting the video on YouTube, he got many requests. He was, quote, "overwhelmed with comments asking if these individuals can purchase the bar." This led him to sign a patent on the nut bar, and he is now planning to launch a business to sell the Nutty Bar for about $175. Good gravy, that is a lot for a nut bar. Quote, "It's surreal to me that I was able to make such an impact by doing something so little with something I love so much. I'm so amazed. People have been so kind and positive, and my kids definitely love it too. They're always watching the squirrels stuff their faces with nuts, and they think it's just so cute." Now, I have a horrible memory, but when I was a kid, I actually had a pet squirrel. His name was Stanley the squirrel, and we'd feed him peanuts, and by God, he loved them a heck of a lot until one day he bit my finger. Which is how all of my childhood stories end, by the way. Alright, time to move on to the next goddamn animal story. 125 bison are on the run after escaping a Nebraska feedlot. It is said that after the more than 100 bison escaped from the feedlot in southern Nebraska, local residents hopped into their pickup trucks and their horses and even their four-wheelers in an effort to try to catch the fleeing animals. Quote, "We had everything." That comes from the county sheriff. The sheriff went on to say, quote, "The bison were at the feedlot to be fattened up." As if you couldn't put that together. To be fattened up before being sent to the slaughter. He goes on to say that the herd probably got spooked by something and stampeded. He goes on to say that although the neighbors were just trying to help, the fact that so many people were chasing the bison caused them to become more scared and split off into singles and pairs. The smaller groups complicated efforts to catch them. Now this next quote is a bit Nebraskan, so just let it go. Quote, "It created a situation where we were causing more damage than we were good." Now this occurred in a farming community which only has a population of 567 people. So the bison are about 1/4 of the population of humans there. So it must have been pretty devastating to the local farm communities. In fact, 5 of the fleeing bison have been struck and killed by vehicles. The drivers and passengers have not been injured, and all of the vehicles were able to be driven away. When a truck driver called on last Wednesday to report that he had hit a bison, the sheriff said in surprise, "What? You said what?" Oh, I love this story so much. I'm sorry I'm laughing too much, but I'm just enjoying myself. Can't I enjoy myself? But this is where Nebraskans get tactical. A Kansas company, said to be specialists in handling bison, has been recruited to help capture the animals. This is where you do a little montage of the individuals and their, special abilities to help capture the goddamn buffaloes. The company brought portable corrals and has captured about 25 bison, and local residents have captured about 50, which means that about 50 are still at large, while wranglers are, quote, "gaining ground" on capturing the remaining bison. The sheriff says that some of the stragglers wandering the fields might be loose for weeks or until crops have been harvested. Quote, "We are just letting them calm down. It's sure hard to make a bison do something it don't want to do. It's a scary thing to see an animal coming at you. Gates, fences, they won't hold them. You've got to keep them as calm as you can and work with them accordingly." Sounds like my divorce lawyer. Okay. For those who don't live in the Midwest and have never seen a bison, they are about 6 feet tall and weigh up to 2,000 pounds. Insert another divorce joke there. But to conclude this story, the sheriff is asking people to evaluate the situation before reaching for a gun and trying to shoot the bison, because if you miss, it'll rampage and possibly cause other bison to rampage and cause further damage. And like previously said, there are about 50 still on the loose, so if you see any goddamn bison walking around your house, why don't you call old Gene Samuelson of the Phelps County Sheriff. Alright, we got 1 more minute left. I'm going to speed through this last animal story. The world's most expensive sheep has just been purchased for $490,000 goddamn dollars. The lamb named Double Diamond, if you look at the picture you can see why, goodness gracious, has sold for a record price. Bidding started at only $13,000, but the bidding war drove up the price until an agreement was reached for the sheep to be shared between 3 farms. Goodness gracious. The sheep has a timeshare. Quote, "It's just like every other business, horse racing, or the cattle business. Every once in a while something special comes along, and yesterday an extra special Texel turned up. Everyone wanted a piece of it." Oh. I think that's a good place to stop. If you want to see pictures of this $500,000 sheep, go online, take a goddamn look. I don't know much about sheep, but I would never pay $500,000 for something that could give me lice. Alright, stay tuned in the next segment where we will do my most bizarre stories of the week. including a 3-year-old girl who got carried off by a kite, and a company who who built coffee cups with a handle on the inside of the cups on accident. We will get to those and more. Stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. I just gave you some animal stories, and now I'm going to give you my weirdest stories of the week, starting off with a 3-year-old girl who got carried off by a kite. So this occurred in Taiwan, and unfortunately it's a very short story. Apparently we don't have too many newsmen in Taiwan. We're going to start off by letting you know that the 3-year-old girl was actually reported to be safe after becoming caught in the strings of a kite and lifted several meters into the air. It actually sounds quite fun. The unidentified girl was taken part in a kite festival last Sunday in the seaside town of Nanliao when she was caught up by a giant, long-tailed orange kite. Video shot at the scene shows her twisting several times above a crowd of adults who struggled to pull the kite back to earth. News reports say that the girl was frightened but suffered no physical injuries in the incident. So that's all this article told me, is what I just told you there. But then I went online and you can actually watch the video of the incident occurring. And of course it's okay to laugh at because the girl's fine. But it's actually a really horrifying video. The article says a few meters. She gets whipped about 50 feet into the air. Apparently the ropes were not tangled around the girl, it was tangled around her neck, and then you see the wind whipping the kite, and it literally flings the little girl like Indiana Jones's whip. It's really horrifying. So if you're looking for something that's simultaneously funny and horrifying, you can go look at this 3-year-old girl getting strangled 50 feet in the air. But she came out okay, which makes me happy, and it's the only reason I can laugh at it. Okay, next story. Ubisoft China apologizes for releasing coffee cups with handles on the inside. This is another one where you should go look this up online. So Ubisoft China recently partnered with a Chinese clothing company in order to produce the wonderful coffee cup that was looked forward to by fans of both the gaming company and the clothing company. Unfortunately, they've pulled the product and apologized for what was supposedly a manufacturing error. The handle was put on the inside of the cup rather than on the outside. Some people are suspecting that this is simply a way that the companies are generating buzz for their new clothing and accessory lines. Quote, Ubisoft China is known for being tongue-in-cheek, playing on the reputation of Ubisoft games, so it's likely this is a viral marketing campaign and not an actual error, which makes sense to me. If you look at the photos, it actually looks quite impossible to be a manufacturing error. The mug made such an impression on Chinese social media that it piqued the interest of many fans, which led the two aforementioned companies to discuss options for selling the destroyed cups or giving them away as rewards. Quote, call me gullible, but my first reaction to learning about Ubisoft's mug was to get out my wallet and find out how I could order one. What I'm saying is, if this is really some elaborate marketing ploy, it's actually kind of brilliant. So if you're looking for a completely useless mug, go to ubisoft.com/shop and you can buy yours today. Okay, a beachgoer finds 78 pounds of cocaine which washed up on a Florida beach, my Florida story of the week. So this occurred on Hollywood Beach, Florida. I wonder if any international tourists have been confused and accidentally went to Hollywood Beach, Florida. Anyways, a beachgoer discovered 30 packages of cocaine, which washed up on the beach last Monday. According to the U.S. Border Patrol Miami sector, the beachgoer contacted the Hollywood Police Department and turned in the packages filled with cocaine over to Border Patrol agents, who presumably used it in order to speed up their production. The 30 packages of cocaine weighed approximately 78 pounds with an estimated street value of over $1 million. The chief patrol agent of Miami said on Twitter, quote, "On Monday, a beachgoer discovered 30 packages with 78 pounds of cocaine and that washed up on hashtag Hollywood Beach, Florida. Miami sector Border Patrol agents seized the narcotics valued at over $1 million. Thankfully, the 78 pounds of drugs didn't make it into our community." And then he shows a picture of not 30 packages of cocaine, but 25. I don't want to draw any conclusions, but it is kind of funny. According to the Miami sector Border Patrol, they have recently responded to multiple reports of narcotic wash-ups on the Florida coast. Over the course of July and August, Border Patrol Miami has seized over 210 pounds of cocaine. Holy crow, that's like $3 million. That's like half a $6 million man. Okay. The chief patrol agent of the U.S. Border Patrol Miami sector said that the rise in drugs washing ashore indicated the presence of smugglers operating along the Florida coast. Glad they could figure that out. Quote, "These recent seizures represent hundreds of pounds of narcotics that will not make it into our streets or into our communities. We are grateful for the community's support to our border security mission here in Florida." So if you're walking along the beach and you find several hundred pounds of cocaine bricks, make sure you turn them into your local police department where they will slowly be whittled away at and properly disposed of by professionals. A man was arrested for going through a Taco Bell drive-thru naked. In his defense, his clothes were in the washer. Now, as somebody who is currently sitting on their bed in their pajamas because the rest of their clothes are in the washer, I think they should just cut this man a break. However, the city of Oklahoma does not feel the same way. Oklahoma City Police Department responded to the Taco Bell incident last Saturday night just before 9 p.m. in reference to a call about a man going through the drive-thru naked. According to the police reports, the 61-year-old male was in his vehicle in the drive-thru completely naked. The man paid for his order at the restaurant and then repeatedly asked the employees for an additional taco. One of the employees was not comfortable with this, and another employee gave him the additional taco when he asked for more sauce, still not leaving the drive-thru. After receiving the sauce, the man asked for napkins, and then eventually left the drive-thru, only to come back and ask for more sauce for his food. Police were eventually able to detain the man, but he told them that he was hungry and that all of his clothes were in the washer. He also stated to the police that he, quote, "didn't know it was against the law to drive naked." I did not know that neither, but if you put everything I didn't know in a book, you could call it a dictionary. Ha 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 ha, okay. That's actually the end of all of my weirdest stories of the week. We're only at 8 minutes, though. So I'm going to keep going with my important real-life stories of the week, starting with the God King of Weird, Elon Musk, who says it will be possible for owners to telepathically summon their Tesla with Neuralink implants. So for those who don't know, Elon Musk recently launched his new company, Neuralink, which plans to put chip implants in people's heads, which will help them communicate with technology or some such nonsense. He says, quote, "If it is raining and you want your car to come pick you up, Tesla Inc. lets you do that. Owners can pull out their phones, press a button, and their car can drive itself to the owner's location. But in the future, Tesla owners may be able to ditch the cell phone and think their car to themselves." Musk answered a question from Twitter. The person asked if, with a Neuralink implant, a person would be able to summon their Tesla telepathically. Musk immediately answered yes, following up that it would be easy. Neuralink has not been tested on humans, of course. It has actually only been tested on pigs, but apparently it's working. So if you're a pig and you need your Tesla delivered to you, that's a lame joke. I'm not going to finish it. The company is working closely with the FDA to establish first human trials. Goodness gracious, these stories are flying by. We have 5 more minutes to fill and only 3 stories left. Okay, Amazon drivers are hanging smartphones in trees to get more work. So this is kind of complicated, but let me walk you through it. Basically, there are some Amazon drivers who are basically contractors for Amazon, basically doing the Uber equivalent of delivering a package, which means whenever Amazon gets an express delivery, these individuals are all notified at once, and only one of them has to pick whether or not they want to deliver the item in order to get their $15 shipping fee. So what people are doing in order to get the jump on their competitors is they are placing multiple phones as close to the Amazon distributing departments as possible, so that when the Amazon department sends out one of these requests, they can accept it as quickly as possible. It's kind of goofy, it's kind of funny. It's just, I imagine driving down the street and seeing a tree filled with a bunch of smartphones. But apparently these are saving people milliseconds, which is enough to buy them time and accept the offer Amazon is making, which makes the drivers more money. Certainly an odd way to handle the situation. I'm not going to read the rest of the article. You can go online and follow up if you are interested. Time to move on to our final story of this segment. An Ontario woman was kicked out of a bingo hall for not using a mask to cover up her breathing hole, which is in her neck. This woman had been battling lung cancer for many years, and as a result is required to breathe through a hole in her neck. Apparently she doesn't go out much more, unless, as her son says, quote, to play at a casino or bingo hall with her friends. According to her son, the 76-year-old woman was excited to see her friends again when Delta Bingo reopened after the COVID-19 shutdown. However, things did not go as planned when she entered the elderly exclusive hall. Once she got inside, management asked her to leave. Quote, she was told to leave by management if she didn't cover up the hole in her neck. Quote, she explained, that was impossible to do. That's how she breathes. The woman's son said that she was embarrassed and as a result didn't want to create a scene and left voluntarily. Once she was in the parking lot, she started crying. This is so sad. Quote, my mom was beside herself and floored. When the manager of the casino saw the woman crying in the parking lot, she decided to allow her back in, but at that point, the old woman refused. Quote, my mom left. She was too embarrassed. The woman went home and Googled some rules around mandatory masks, finding that she had been treated wrongly, and she decided to go back to the bingo hall this Saturday and tried to enter again, but didn't make it past the front door before being stopped. They told her, quote, you can't come in here unless you cover the hole in your neck. The woman then pulled out a phone and, like a boss, she recorded the interaction with the Delta Bingo employee. As a result, the Delta Bingo CEO, Cam Johnston, said that he will take a, quote, hard look over the case, but said people who can't wear masks shouldn't be visiting their establishment at this time. Quote, I'll make a judgment shortly, but we would prefer that people who are unable to wear masks do not attend. I think it's best for them. Safety has to be our number one priority at this time. We're trying to protect everyone, but my first concern and my first obligation is the health and safety of all our customers and staff. I don't have any comment on that. I would like to know who you think is right in this case. Obviously, it's an uncomfortable one, but leave me a comment about what you think. For now, we're going to go to a break. We'll be right back to talk about a goddamn really weird tree. Stay tuned for that, and later we'll get to my top 10 weirdest phobias.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. I ran out of stories, so now we're just going to spend a heck of a lot of time talking about a tree. A bizarre story, in fact, of a man who tried to murder a 600-year-old tree. If that doesn't interest you, you can go ahead and skip to the next segment, which is my top 10 phobias. Weirdest phobias. Phobias I can relate to and some that I detest. But if you're into trees, this is the segment for you. It all began in May 1989, a bizarre murder attempt in Austin, Texas, gripped the nation and made worldwide news. The details of the case were unusual and unlike anything police had ever seen before. This is because the victim was Austin's oldest resident, a 600-year-old tree known as treaty oak. Treaty oak is a spectacular specimen. It is centuries older than the city it resides in and stretches out to a spread of nearly 100 feet. In the 1920s, the American Forestry Association named the treaty oak the most perfect specimen of a tree in North America. And thanks to a citywide fundraiser in the 1930s, the tree even owns the park it lives in. That does not make any sense. Quote, certainly there are not many trees, not just in Austin or in Texas, but in the world that own their own land. That came from Austin's first city forester. He goes on to say, well, certainly we had several historic trees in Austin, but the most important tree was treaty oak. I like this story a lot if you can't tell. Native American tribes, including Tonkawa and the Comanche, believed the tree was sacred. Students would take field trips to the treaty oak every year, and residents found shade and comfort under its cover during the heat of the summer. The tree is also a place for ceremony. In fact, the man quoted before also said, quote, when I decided to propose to my wife, I proposed under the treaty oak. Then you were trespassing on the tree's property. But that wasn't the only crime made against this beautiful tree. The tree suffered an assassination attempt. The man previously quoted said, quote, I cannot understand why anyone would harm such a beautiful, beloved piece of Texas history. The city forester said that in 1989, while he was hosting a group of state foresters from across the country, he took them on a tour of Austin's parks. When they got to the treaty oak, they noticed dead grass on the ground surrounding the tree. He said, quote, I just assumed it was a parks employee that got a little sloppy. I didn't give it a second thought. However, months later, the tree continued to deteriorate and the leaves began to show symptoms of chemical poisoning, or as they say in the business, herbicide. Quote, so right away we dug up some of the soil and took some tissue samples, sent it off to the laboratory. A week or two later we got the results back that the treaty oak had been poisoned. The poison detected was a powerful herbicide known as Velpar, manufactured by the chemical company DuPont and usually used to kill hardwoods on pine plantations. Quote, we knew that it was an intentional poisoning, and that's when the fun started. Now, it should be noted that this was the first time anybody ever investigated the assassination of a tree, but it actually began to make national and international news. Quote, it became the most famous tree in the world. Front page of the Times. It was in Sports Illustrated, People Magazine, National Geographic, and it was on all the networks. People from all over the world began to be invested in the case. Quote, people started hearing about it, and one of the people to hear about it was H. Ross Perot, who was a billionaire and business magnate based in Texas. He offered up his help with the expenses of the investigation. Quote, he came to us and said, whatever it takes, however long it takes, you just send me the bill. It's like a film noir about a tree. With Perot's blank check in hand, the forester and his team went on to call every expert and scientist in their Rolodex. Quote, we called the experts in, pretty much all of them that were familiar with the way that this compound works on trees, said that this is a dead tree, that it will not survive. But that didn't stop us from doing everything in our power to save it, injecting the tree with salt to move poison off the tissue and sugar to spur leaf production, creating large barriers for shade from the sun, and sprinkling the tree with fresh spring water. Now look, I'm not a tree expert, but I can't imagine pouring a bunch of salt and shading it from the sun is going to save a plant or a tree or anything like that. In fact, I think that might be the most effective way to kill it. But I am not a forester. Quote, we were trying to move heaven and earth, and the police were on the case to find the culprit. In fact, when it was first reported that the Treaty Oak had been vandalized, the Austin Police Department thought that it was a joke. Quote, I think a lot of folks viewed it as being beneath the dignity of the office. And this is where our hero comes in. John Jones, a man who worked 13 years as a detective and is now retired. Only one job could bring him back. He said, quote, criminal mischief is what the title is. The Treaty Oak was the quote-unquote victim. They thought that was just hilarious. He's making fun of the police department for not taking it seriously. He goes on to say, quote, I thought I'd be able to go, oh, no suspects, no nothing, file it away. But the case became bigger than I could ever imagined. Everybody was interested in it. Really? Was everybody interested in it? Okay. Thankfully, I got started on the case early. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence for me to work with. No witnesses, no surveillance camera footage, and no traces of DNA. If you find a fingerprint on a tree, that would be pretty goddamn impressive. But just as John Jones got discouraged on the case, the Austin Forestry Service and DuPont offered up a joint $11,000 reward. And so people got talking. John Jones said, quote, I was fielding phone calls from Tokyo, from England, from Canada. We were just getting calls all over the place. There was a parade of people, hundreds, thousands of people came by that heard about it in the news. They left chicken soup, Maleks, and left Tums. They left nickels and dimes and dollars. They mailed cards and letters from all over the world. Get well soon. We're praying for you. Whether it was evangelicals that came out there, or Buddhist monks, or white witches, New Agers with the crystals, all these groups genuinely went there to try to connect with the spirit and try to help it, to try and heal it. Quote, with the support of the world behind me, me and the police began to close in on a lead. As the Treaty Oak continued to receive media coverage, a woman by the name of Cindy Blanco came forward claiming to have information pertaining to the case. Blanco was acquainted with a man named Paul Stedman Cullen, with whom she carpooled to a local methadone clinic. During their car rides, Blanco said that Cullen spoke about his love for this mental health counselor who wasn't returning the same affections. Blanco alleged that Cullen had searched for books on witchcraft, looking for an anti-love spell to mend his broken heart. Although the details of the ritual remain unclear, Blanco claimed that Cullen believed that killing a living thing, he would be able to kill the love that remained in his heart. This story about a tree has everything, man. Mystery, murder, assassinations, witches, forbidden love. But now it's time to go back to our hero. Jones said, quote, Colin said, well, let me be frank and pick the biggest thing around here and kill it. And as it decomposes, so will my love for her. But without evidence or an admission of guilt, I could not make the arrest. So I pulled from my experience as an undercover cop to get the information I needed. With Blanco, I had the perfect informant. Quote, we hired her up. That's a really weird way to put it. Put wires on her and sent her out. And she gathered the evidence for us. It was like putting $1 in a jukebox. This is my new all-time greatest weird news story, I believe. Quote, based on what Colin told her on the wire, we went and got an arrest warrant. And then I went and got evidentiary search warrant to search his residence and his truck. At Colin's home, we found a stack of books covering everything from religion to quantum mechanics, a .22 caliber rifle, and dirt samples to test for Velpar. With the mounting evidence against him, a trial seemed like an open and shut case, but because of a prior conviction, Colin faced the possibility of serving life in prison for his crimes. While Colin maintained his innocence throughout the case, he alleged admission of guilt on the tapes with Blanco, which became the damning piece of evidence against him. He was found guilty and sentenced to 9 years in prison. However, he would only serve 3 of those 9 years. When he was released, he spent a remainder of his life in California, where he passed away in 2001. To this day, Treaty Oak still stands on Baylor Street, although experts were only to save 35% of the tree, and while the oak still grows signs of the attempt to kill it, missing bark, branches that were removed, it never stopped growing. In 1997, it produces its first crop of acorns since the poisoning. Quote, the treaty oak is a powerful, powerful life force. This comes from the forester, who is now the executive director for the Texas chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture. Quote, everybody wrote that thing off. Almost 30 years later, that tree is doing better than it has ever been. More than anything, it has become a symbol of survival. It survives because it follows the rules of nature, and it's good. And it's good. It just gives and gives and gives. It never takes anything back. And that is the end of the greatest story ever told. Oh wait, there's one more line. Learn about the Treaty Oak, including details surrounding the trial, in the latest episode of Great Big Story. Alright, that's it for the weird news of the day. Stay tuned to the next goddamn segment where we will get to my top 10 weirdest phobias. We'll probably have to do more than 10 just because I'm speeding through everything today. So stay tuned for that.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We just told you the greatest story ever made. Now we're going to get into the top 10 weirdest phobias. They're not going to be 10 of them. I'm just going to name some weird phobias. Starting off with Arachibacteriophobia, which is the fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. It is said that this usually originates to a child who is freaked out due to the fact that peanut butter is one of the only foods that sticks to the top of your mouth. Despite this, it is said to happen to almost everyone at one point or another. This is according to actual studies. People get paid to actually research that. But I guess they do have purpose because people with this phobia are extremely afraid of it. That is what phobia means. The severity of arachnobutyrophobia varies from person to person. Some with this condition may be able to eat small amounts of peanut butter, while others will avoid eating peanut butter or anything with the consistency of peanut butter altogether. That's such a shame. Peanut butter is the greatest food. The phobia can stem from greater phobias, such as things that are sticky or a fear of choking. It may also stem from a traumatic incident with peanut butter, such as choking or being allergic to it. How do you choke on peanut butter? That's borderline impressive. I like how they list fear of choking as a phobia, as though it's irrational to be afraid of choking. Anyways, the next one is nomophobia, which I think is one we can all relate to. It's the fear of being without your cell phone. People with nomophobia experience excessive anxiety about not having their phone with them. They will either become stressed or even go into a panic attack. Sometimes the simple occurrence of their battery being low on their phone can lead them to feel incredibly nervous. Regardless of the circumstances, not being able to use their phone causes people with nomophobia to become panicked and experience extreme symptoms of anxiety. This, of course, stems from people having a cell phone addiction. People with this phobia may obsessively check their phone throughout the day. It appears to be fairly common in recent surveys of varying populations. The prevalence of anxiety related to not having or being able to use a cell phone ranged from 9 to 77%. Good gravy, that does not sound like an accurate test at all. A group in Italy has suggested that nomophobia be added to the 5th version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I don't know how you can call it that if a potential 77% of the population has the disease. In which case it's probably just a human fault. Alright, next phobia, plutophobia. Now, plutophobia, I believe, has become more and more popular over the recent years, and it's the fear of money. According to this article, most people wish they had more money. Great research. And plutophobia is the fear of accumulating wealth. People with plutophobia may fear becoming wealthy themselves or have the fear of wealthy people. They generally dread money itself and having to deal with money. As a result, many of these people potentially sabotage their careers to prevent them from making more money or becoming wealthy. The fear of becoming wealthy may stem from a fear of responsibilities or pressures associated with it, or the fear of getting robbed. That doesn't make any sense. You're afraid of having something because you're afraid of losing it. Preposterous. Xanthophobia. The fear of the color yellow. People with xanthophobia are usually also afraid of any object that is yellow, such as school buses and flowers. They will avoid the color yellow at all costs. This phobia tends to interfere with everyday life, as yellow things can be found everywhere. Look on the bright side, they're probably really good at brushing their teeth. Octophobia, the fear of the number 8. This is a very interesting one according to these researchers, because it is the only phobia that picks out a certain number. There are a few other known phobias that are related to specific numbers, except for the fear of the numbers themselves, which is arithmophobia, which is just a fear of numbers, and the fear of the number 13, which is triskaidekaphobia. Yeah, I'm afraid of 13, actually, myself. People with octophobia, though, not only fear the symbol 8 as it appears written down on addresses or in advertisements, but they also can fear objects present in groups of 8. So whenever they see maids a-milking, they always have to panic. Many scientists fear that this comes from 8 resembling the sign of infinity, which frightens some people because they do not understand the concept, or because it makes them feel insignificant. It may also come from a traumatic event involving the number 8, such as an accident that happened on the 8th of the month. That sounds kind of silly to me, but what do I know? Optophobia, the fear of opening one's eyes. This fear is reportedly extremely debilitating, as it is hard for an individual to carry out daily activities without opening their eyes. People with octophobia may prefer to stay indoors or in dimly lit areas. The phobia is usually associated with generalized anxiety disorder. Like so many other phobias, this fear is usually the result of a traumatic incident, which is specific to each individual with the phobia. Globophobia is one of my favorites. It's the fear of balloons. The level of fear varies from person to person and can range from avoiding being near a balloon to avoiding places with balloons altogether. In some people, the fear is so great that even seeing a balloon on television triggers intense anxiety. The phobia can be especially hard for young children, as balloons are often present at children's birthday parties. This phobia is usually brought on by a traumatic experience with a balloon as a child, such as balloon popping and the noise frightening them. It can also be linked to a fear of clowns or colorophobia, as the two are often found together. Alright, time to move on. Hippopotamonstrosiquipapalidophobia. Something like that. It's the fear of long words. You've probably heard of this one before. Of course, it is funny that it is ironically long, and is in fact the longest word in the dictionary. Another name for this phobia is sesquipedalophobia. Sesquipedality is one of my personal favorite words. This phobia is thought to be developed from being embarrassed by pronouncing long words incorrectly. This may occur while reading aloud in front of a class as a child. That happened to me several times. I never had a fear of words, though. The phobia is common in people with dyslexia. Alright, this next one is another one I think we can all relate to. Ephobiaphobia, which is the fear of adolescence. People with this disease may perceive teenagers as out of control or dangerous. People with this fear may believe that teenagers are rude, unpredictable, and do not follow the rules. This fear is thought to develop from the negative portrayal of teenagers in media. People with this phobia are afraid of teenagers and will not want to be around them. In fact, they will even avoid going to a friend's house if they have teenagers or are going to places where teenagers tend to hang out. So this is an odd one because it only exists for adults. Alright, next one. Omphalophobia, which is the fear of belly buttons. People with this disease will avoid seeing or touching belly buttons, even their own. They might even put a bandage over their belly buttons to avoid looking at it. They will sometimes avoid places where belly buttons might be exposed, like beaches. I can relate. Belly buttons are weird. Linen phobia, which is exactly what it sounds like, the fear of string. A person with this linen phobia will have an extreme reaction when even thinking of string, let alone seeing it in person. People with linen phobia will avoid string or anything having to do with string, such as sewing or tying shoes. Does that mean they have to get Velcro, or do the little things on Velcro scare these people too? I don't know. I'm not an expert. This usually develops from a negative association with string. Really? I'm starting to see a trend here. Many scientists believe that this can be related to being restrained or restricted. So kind of like being tied up, I suppose. If a person that experiences a traumatic event, such as being tied up as punishment or kidnapping, may develop lenophobia. It can also develop simply from watching these events on television. Vestophobia, fear of clothing. Now we're talking. For many people, this manifests as a fear of specific garments. For others, it might come as a fear of tight-fitting clothing that causes them to feel restrained. In other cases, it is a fear of all clothing. It can arise from an allergy to a specific type of fabric or a traumatic event associated with a certain piece of clothing. For example, there have been cases where former soldiers develop a fear of military clothing. All right, ergophobia, the fear of working. People with ergophobia tend to have extreme anxieties associated with their place of work or work environment. Others may have a fear of manual labor or the act of working itself. Still, others can have a fear of finding a job. All of these cases would be considered ergophobia. This fear of work can lead to anxiety attacks and impair a person's ability to function professionally. It can have a huge impact on a person's life, as most people need to maintain a job to survive. Ergophobia may stem from occupational burnout, where a person becomes so stressed and exhausted by their job that they feel they can no longer complete it. It can also be associated with negative work experiences such as abusive employer or poor work-life balance. All right, next one. This is one of my favorites just because of the name. Decidophobia. It's the fear of making decisions. Decidophobia makes making any kind of decision seem impossible for somebody with the disease, as they do not trust their own opinions. A person with decidophobia may excessively rely on others to help them with decision making. They may even turn to an external source such as astrology for advice. It could also be part of a larger mental health disorder called dependent personality disorder. One of the symptoms of dependent personality disorder is relying on others to make decisions for you. Isoptrophobia, the fear of mirrors. I don't need to go into that one. I'm relating too hard to that one. Phobophobia, this is where we get meta. It's the fear of phobias. This can be described as free-floating anxiety, where a person spirals in a circle of anxiety from fearing fear itself. In that respect, it is self-fulfilling prophecy. Phobia is commonly co-diagnosed with other types of specific phobias and is often associated with anxiety disorders. If you ask me, fear is one of the few things you should be afraid of. People with this phobia will often avoid social situations or other situations that can lead to anxiety. When extreme, it will greatly interfere with the individual's everyday life. Anemophobia, the fear of wind. People who suffer from this tend to become anxious out of doors and near open windows. Anxious feelings can also manifest themselves when passing hand dryers or overhead air vents. It is believed that this fear is triggered by an experience embedded in the person's subconscious, in which a gust of wind knocked them over as a child. Allodoxophobia, another one of my favorites, the fear of opinions. It is believed to be associated with the previous encounters wherein the person affected has not been able to properly express their opinion, or has had their opinion rejected. It is visible in social situations when the affected person refuses to involve themselves in discussions, and can also reflect a fear of confrontation. Alright, that's all I'm gonna give you today. If you have your own funny fears that you want to put in the description, not in the description, in a comment below, that would be fantastic. But for now, I'm gonna have to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will also ask that you subscribe, leave a comment below, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and for the love of God, please have a good night.